All right, what's up, folks? Welcome back to the Occupy Fantasy YouTube channel. We are here this afternoon for some DraftKings MMA DFS UFC Vegas 27 card, best bets, picks, lineup advice, FanDuel tips, everything you need to know for tonight's fights, or I guess these afternoon's fights, given that it's an early start time. And you'll notice that we're here early, 2 p.m. Eastern today, because the fights do start at 4 p.m. Eastern. We'll be here until about I guess 2:30 or so, maybe a couple minutes since we started late. But answering your questions, breaking down the UFC card, giving our favorite picks for DFS lineups, FanDuel and DraftKings, and our favorite bets, both money lines, totals, props, you name it. We had a big week last week. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy. I won the 555 on DK for $30,000. Woohoo! And I'm joined today, as always, by Jake McIntyre at DFS_MMA and owner of MMADFS.com, who hit like every single bet in the world last week. What's up, Jake?
What's up, Brian? Pretty good week, man. Let's keep this heater going. Although now we get a late fight cancellation like 5 minutes ago, so that's always fun.
Yeah, dude. So for those who weren't aware, you didn't see the Discord message, the Medeiros Hadjovic fight has been canceled, postponed for whatever reason. It wouldn't be a UFC slate if we didn't get a cancellation, a couple hours before lock. That fight is off, so make sure you don't have those fighters in your lineups. The model's already been updated. Ownership has been updated as well. So go check it out, occupyfantasy.com. So our plan for today, we're going to talk about this main event, Font versus Garbrandt. We'll talk about any newcomers that are making their debut. Talk about some fights we want to target, some lineup strategies, low-owned fighters to play in tournaments, and then we'll try to, at least once ever in our lives, hit a stream parlay, our two favorite bets, together at the end of the show. So Jake, just really quick from a high level, we have 12 fights. Kind of in that sweet spot where we can leave some salary, we can pay up, lots of good options all over the price board. But talk to me. You and I were talking all week, and we don't really think for DFS that this is a good low risk slate and a much better high risk slate.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that kind of stems from the main event. I mean, we think this main event has the potential to to make it out of the first round, and if that does happen, it's going to be a lower volume boxing match where we could see the winner score like 90 points. We don't think it's going to be one of those main events where it's going to be volume driven and where you get 100, 130, 140 point score. So there's really no reason to stack it. It's almost like a 3-round fight from that sense. Like, you wouldn't stack a 3-round fight that you expected to end in round 2 or round 3, so you wouldn't stack this fight. So just based off that alone, that kind of ruins the DraftKings low-risk strategy of stacking the main event. And then on top of that, we have some other things going on that just it makes for a better high-risk slate if you're going to do low risk. I think there's some ways to do it, but it's a different strategy than normal.
Yeah, and just again, to be fully transparent, right? Ever since I qualified for the Knockout King final, I've been really focusing a lot on trying to build low risk MMA lineups. And so what I've been doing, in addition to all the qualifiers for that, I've been playing a lot of 50-50s and double ups on DraftKings just to prep myself for next year. That way I'm not taken aback by strategies when the Knockout King comes back around. I'm actually not playing low risk on this slate today, Jake, just because it is so tough. You can't really stack the main event, like you said. There are some mispriced fighters, which we'll talk about here in a second, but a lot of the high money line fighters may or may not get there. I mean, it's a really tough slate overall. So you mentioned the Font Garbrandt fight, how it should be low volume. Give us some quick expectations on ownership for these guys and your DFS takes.
Yeah, so I mean, we have close to a coin flip in the lines. So our ownership projections, they're almost the same. Both guys are projected right around 40% owned, which is interesting because you look at Font, and six of his last 7 wins have scored 100 or more DraftKings points. And then you look at Cody Garbrandt, and he's never scored more than 91 DraftKings points in a fight that made it past the first round. So the idea that these are going to be the same owned when one guy clearly has a much higher ceiling and can score well beyond the first round, I think is pretty interesting. But I think a lot of that is off recency bias. We saw Garbrandt land a highlight reel, like Street Fighter style KO in his last match. Font's coming off a round 1 KO of Marlon Moraes too, but I don't think it had the same impact on people. Garbrandt's the former champ. People seem more drawn to Garbrandt for whatever reason, despite the fact he's been knocked out in 3 of his last 4 fights. So he's going to be way overowned. I mean, the odds indicate he has a 10% chance to get a round one finish, which is what we think he needs to return value. And he's going to be 4 times that owned in DFS. So in my opinion, he's a terrible DFS play. I think he's going to be, the most over-owned fighter on the slate. But, then watch him, get a round one KO and score 130 points and make us look foolish. But Font has a lot of things going for him here. He lands a lot more volume. He normally shoots for a takedown or two. I think he's landed a takedown in 6 of his 11 UFC fights, whereas Garbrandt has won in his last 8. Font's landing 5.21 significant strikes per minute, whereas Garbrandt's down at 3.35. Garbrandt's been knocked down 5 times in his last 3 losses, whereas Font's never been knocked down in the UFC. We just have a lot of reasons to like Font. He's also got a 6-inch reach advantage. He's got a really good jab. I expect Garbrandt to attack his lead leg. Font's a little heavy on the lead leg, so I think Garbrandt's going to attack the lead leg. We're going to see a really low volume, slow start to the fight. I think we see a feeling out process. I'm kind of expecting a round 2 KO here. And I think if Garbrandt gets it, he's going to score in the 90s. And if Font gets it, he can still score above 100. So I still like Font, but I'm off Garbrandt.
Yeah, I think, and this is just another, interesting angle to this entire slate where we have the main event underdog who really doesn't get the full benefit of being in a 5-round fight based on his fighting style, yet he's going to be 40% owned. And you can go way under him in tournaments. Not even really that great of a low-risk play, all things considered. Although the last time this happened, and I said that, it was Jerry Prochaska, and he scored about 1,000 DraftKings points. But I do think this is a different story here because we know Garbrandt, a much longer history. Jake, 2 other things that make this slate really interesting. And if you guys have specific questions, go ahead and ask them. But, Jake and I, we always like to break it down from a high level. It's how we do so well in DFS, how we do so well in betting. And just looking at the slate from a big picture. And, Jake, 2 things that make this slate pretty interesting. One, we have the late replacement, which we haven't had in a while, right, where a guy comes in Friday, the opponent keeps his original DraftKings price and is crazy mispriced. We have that here with David Dvorak. His opponent dropped out yesterday, and Ronderos is stepping in, making his debut. We'll get to that in a second. So we have that mispriced angle. Secondly, this slate is very interesting because the metrics don't have a huge sample size, and the samples that we do have on some of these fighters are so skewed in one direction that no matter how much you try to normalize the data, you get some wacky numbers. And Jake, 2 examples of that are Jarrett Vandera, who's one of our favorite plays on the slate. We'll talk about him. Only 1 UFC fight, got completely dominated. So no matter how much you try to normalize that data, his metrics, any type of metrics-based projection isn't going to look that great. And then Felicia Spencer and Norma Dumont, who are in the women's featherweight division, who, if you don't know, never fights. The last featherweight fight was Amanda Nunes' title fight a couple months ago. The last women's featherweight fight before that was Nunes' last title fight last year. So we don't have a lot of data on these girls. So Jake, someone like Felicia Spencer, 4 UFC featherweight matches, 2 she's gotten dominated by not even human opponents in Nunes and Cyborg, and she's thoroughly beaten the other 2 opponents. So this is all a long-winded way of saying we have a lot of things to try to take into account here, and I really think it's one of the best slates for your style, which is matchup-based film watching.
Totally agree, man. This is definitely a hashtag tape grinders slate. I talked about it a little bit in the write-up with Spencer. She's got the Nunes effect where her takedown defense is entirely based on that one fight against Nunes. Her accuracy is terrible because she went 0 for 15 against Cyborg and Nunes. She absorbed a ton of strikes. But she also, just think about anything you do in life. You go do something really hard and then you go do something easier afterwards. You're going to succeed a lot more just coming off. That was a learning experience for Spencer. She got pummeled for 5 rounds and, she survived. She's a tank. So if she can go 5 rounds with Nunes, I think it's going to be hard for Dumont to finish her. But the numbers are totally crazy on her. I'm kind of just ignoring the stats on that fight and just totally doing a tape watcher thing. Same with Vandera. I think you got to throw the numbers out and you just got to look at who these fighters are, and then you got to look at the context surrounding their numbers. I think you summed it up pretty well.
Cool. Yeah. And just, when you try to play low risk, you try to play mispriced fighters. You try to play some of these projection favorites. And with all the numbers being skewed, it's just another reason not to play low risk contests today. We'll dive into these fighters a little bit, but we do have a specific question here from E. He says, any 9K plays that you like, or is it better to fade the 9K range? So, Jake, I'm going to bring up the model again just to sort by DraftKings salary here. We have Ismagulov, who's 9,500, is a minus 590 favorite. Bruno Silva, 9,300. Ben Rothwell, 9,200. Koulibaly, 9,100. And Tafa is 9K. Jake, I think I can guess who your favorite play is in that range.
I mean, I'm definitely on Silva here. I'm always betting whoever's fighting Victor Rodriguez. I don't care who it is. So Bruno Silva by default is my play there. And after that, I'm looking at Koulibaly. I know you like Ismagulov, and I totally get it. He's like the biggest favorite on the slate, low owned. I don't see a ton of finishing ability there. I'm not really on Tafa or Rothwell. I think those guys are some fool's gold. Their lines are way too high. So yeah, for me, it's Silva then Koulibaly, and then I get the Ismagulov angle, and he's in that, he's in the money ball spot. Round one or first fight of the night, favorite has just been exploding week after week. I don't know. I think that's a really tough fight against Alves for him, though. But definitely going to be light on Rothwell and Tafa, and just praying that the field is going to, go after and chase their finishing lines, because those guys are not good.
Yes, I mean, so let's talk about Vandera, right? We said he's one of our favorite plays. You wrote him up in the plug. I'm really heavily exposed. From our conversation, it sounds like you're heavily exposed in tournaments as well. Just give us a quick rundown on Vandera. What happened to him in his debut, and what is a more realistic expectation for this fight? And Tafa, his opponent, what we can make of him.
Yeah, so Vandera is, he's a BJJ black belt, which is kind of rare for a heavyweight. But we didn't get to see him use that at all in his debut. He went against another grappler in Sergey Spivak, and he starts the fight pushing Spivak back against the fence. He throws one leg kick, and you're like, okay, that's probably not a good idea. Throws a second leg kick, 30 seconds in. Spivak grabs his leg, tackles him, and then controls him on the ground for 4.5 minutes. And you're like, all right, whatever. Bad round, terrible start, but hey, start the second round, do better. Comes out in the second round, immediately throws a head kick, spins himself around. Spivak takes his back, takes him down, controls him for another 4.5 minutes. And then I think 10 seconds before the round ended, he just pummeled him to the point that the ref stopped the fight. So we only saw a minute, less than a minute probably, of that fight on the feet. And he was doing fine. He just didn't need to be throwing these leg kicks. I mean, he was pushing Spivak back. He didn't look great, but he wasn't losing the fight until he was throwing these kicks and getting taken down. So, I mean, hopefully that's a learning experience. I did hear him say to his corner, overheard him say that he just wasn't feeling it that day. Whatever it was, maybe it was an adrenaline dump, just like octagon jitters, whatever it is, he just had an off day. And I mean, today we're going to find out if that was an off day or if he's an off fighter, because he gets a much easier matchup here against Justin Tafa, who's 1-2 in the UFC, coming off a decision loss. I mean, that was a close one. He could have won that fight, but he got knocked out.
Against not a great opponent, by the way, against Carlos Felicia.
Yeah,
come on.
Right. I mean, he's just a pure heavyweight. He's a pure traditional boxing heavyweight. He's not going to really get it. He shot for 2 takedowns in his last fight, didn't land any. He hasn't shot for any others before. He got knocked out in the first round by Yorgan de Castro. I think we all know, what the deal with Yorgan is. And then his only, Justin Tafa's only knockout came against a terrible, 1-3 fighters out of the UFC now. So Vandera can actually use his wrestling here if he needs to. I mean, he might not. Maybe he just comes in and knocks Tafa out. But if things get bad, he can just start wrestling with Tafa. And Vandera, he's never actually been knocked out. The only TKO loss was in his last fight, and it was just a stoppage. From his face was just too bloody that they couldn't continue. But he wasn't knocked out. It's not like he got dropped on the feet. So I think he's going to be able to hold up pretty well with Tafa. He's a tough guy, and he can wrestle when he needs to. I think it's a great matchup, and I don't think the line makes sense. And I mean, the field agrees. The Tafa line opened the week as negative 200. It immediately got bet down. I mean, I think Vandera wins this fight, and I think he has a couple different ways he could do it, whether it's on the feet or the mat. He has a few submissions on his record, but lately he's been getting more knockouts. So really, really like Vandera here. I think Tafa is a fraud.
So for those of you listening, we like Vandera as a money line play. We like his props. And we especially like him, Jake. I mean, Christ, dude, he's what is his projected ownership? On a 12 fight card, we got him at
20%.
20%. I mean, for a guy with his finishing upside at his price, It's kind of crazy. I was going to say the same thing. I heard him overtell his corner that day that he wasn't feeling it. And for anyone who's out there who's listening that's played sports before, right? And some days you just wake up and you're lethargic. Your body's not moving. You're a step slow. You're not reacting. Your shot's not falling, whatever it may be. Sucks to happen in a fist fight. Like that definitely a time you need to have all your bearings together. But, some days that happens. And like you, Jake, I'm looking forward to. So, all right, we talked a lot about that fight. So we're here for 12, 15 more minutes. If you guys have specific questions about the slate, go ahead and throw them in the chat. We'll answer them here for you. Jake, let's go back to the Dvorak fight. I'm going to sort here by money line. David Dvorak fighting the late replacement Juan Camilo Ronderos, who we both agree was probably one of the worst fighters we've ever seen. Dvorak is now a -500 favorite. Price couldn't change, obviously, after the slate was released, so he's underpriced at $8,800 on DraftKings. $18 on FanDuel, going to be the highest projected owned fighter. Jake, if we're looking for a finish spot for Dvorak, this is finally it.
Yeah, man. We've been waiting on like a good matchup with Dvorak since he came into the UFC, and he kept getting these tough matchups, and he kept having these low volume decision wins where like as soon as he gets a good matchup, we're going to be hammering this guy. And Pava looked like another tough matchup, and then Friday during weigh-ins, Pava drops out. In comes Ronderos, who's been taken down, I'm not even exaggerating, 20 times in his last 2 fights. Like, this guy is so terrible, and he's undersized. He's small. Like, if you saw him next to Dvorak, he's shorter. He missed weight by 2.5 pounds, so he's probably not even in the best shape. Dude, he's so terrible. I thought he lost every single round in his last 2 fights, and somehow he won both fights. Hopefully he doesn't bring the judges with him, but I think Dvorak's going to absolutely murder this kid. And I think if he starts shooting for takedowns on Dvorak, I think Dvorak has really good submission, defensive wrestling. I think we could see a round 1 submission from Dvorak here if Ronderos does what he did in those last couple fights. And he likes to shoot for takedowns with very poor accuracy. So Dvorak could just defend a couple takedowns, take it down himself, submit this guy with a rear naked choke. Dvorak's on this massive 15-fight winning streak. He's 2-0 in the UFC. He had finished 13 straight opponents before coming into the UFC. This guy is an absolute beast. He seems like he cares more about winning than finishing, but I think that's also partially due to the opponents he's faced. So now if he gets an opponent that's teed up for a finish, I think he will take advantage of the opportunity. But he did score poorly in his last 2 fights. That's the only reason for any hesitation, is that if he chose to, he could just pick him apart for 3 rounds and do what he did in his last 2 fights and not put up a big score. But it's so unlikely. Have to imagine he's going to go for a finish here, and it couldn't be a better spot.
I know you're salivating over the potential release of those prop lines for that fight. So if you guys see them,
so annoyed.
If you guys see those props get released at the legal sports books, hit us up in the chat, let us know so we can jump on those. You heard that right. Ronderos, late replacement, literally got taken down 20 times in his last 2 fights. Completed one of 8 or 9 takedowns in those 2 fights. The biggest discrepancy you'll ever see. Somehow 4-0 in his career. So. All right, next question from the chat, and there's a nice transition to a segment we always like to do, fights to target, fights to fade. So, Jake, what are a couple fights that you're targeting? You like fighters from both sides, and what are some fights where you think the field is a little over-owned in those spots?
Yeah, so I have 3 fights that I'm looking at targeting. It's going to be the Hermansson-Shabazian fight. I think the winner of that likely gets a first-round finish, if not maybe a second-round finish. I don't see it going past the second round, and I really like Hermansson to win it in the first, but if Shabazian can stay on his feet, I think he has a great chance to land a round 1 KO. So that's probably my favorite fight on the slate to target. After that, I really like Spencer Dumont, although I'm more interested in Spencer on DraftKings and Dumont on FanDuel based on takedown defense. But again, that's another one where I think either Spencer's going to get a first-round finish or Dumont's going to be able to stay on her feet and she's just going to win a striking battle, because she's definitely a better striker than Spencer, but Spencer is a way better grappler. So we're going to know in the first 30 seconds how that fight's going to go. If Spencer gets her down, she's going to win the fight. If her takedown defense holds up, I think she wins the fight. But it's another one to target. And then the third one's a little more under the radar. That's going to be Kulabau and then Shailin. I think that one, 2 low-owned guys. Kulabau's he's winless so far. He has 1 draw and 1 loss in his 2 UFC fights. But he was fighting Jalen Turner up a weight class in his debut, so I think we could throw that one away. And then he's coming off a draw, which I'm not going to say, honestly, I think he could have lost that fight, but he almost got a round 1 KO against a really tough opponent. Air Jordan, that's my boy. So, I mean, I got to suck it up here and, watch the Culibao and kind of take off my rose-colored glasses and look at his upside. But I think he has KO upside, basically. He's not a submission guy. All of his finishes have come by KO. And now he gets a high variance play in Shailin.
Yeah, so
they changed that guy's name 3 times this week. I don't know.
Yeah, dude. No matter which source you use, his name is different in every single source. Shailin.
Yeah.
So the thing is, Shailin, like we saw in the last pay-per-view card, a big unknown, a wide range of outcomes because there's not a lot of tape on him, not a lot of recent tape at least. We do know he's a wrestler, likes to shoot for takedowns. He's up against I wouldn't say a quality opponent in Culibao, but Jake, a lot of times there are, high-level strategies and things we look at, and there are a couple regional scenes that we like targeting fighters from, maybe, the Dagestani scene coming up, or areas we like to fade. Alaska comes to mind as one of the probably the worst regional promotions in the world, and we actually get to fade one of those guys today in Victor Rodriguez. And the other one is, I think now, we talked about this in that pay-per-view card in our stream before that. Either all these fighters are going to overperform or they're going to underperform coming from this WLF Chinese league. They all massively underperformed. And now we get another fighter from that in Shailin. So just based on that, I think, we probably shouldn't have too high expectations. But, Jake, when you have a fighter that we have literally no unknowns against an opponent that's not that great, I mean, you have to take your shots at 20% ownership.
Yeah, man. Also, I feel kind of invested in this guy because I spent 8 hours on Wednesday just deciphering and doing Google translations through Chinese YouTube videos, trying to even find his tape. Nothing's written in English. They're kind of low quality, so it's hard to see the faces. I mean, I spent so much time just trying to identify fighters in tape, let alone watch tape. So I'm a little bit invested in seeing how this guy performs, but he shoots for a ton of takedowns. And I mean, like you said, it's a high variance thing. So we don't know. He's either going to be terrible or he's going to be really good. And if he's terrible, then that means Culibao is a great play. And if he's really good, that means Shailin's a great play. So I think, it's a fight to target from that sense because we get a high variance play and he could be really good. He could be really bad. But what we do know is he's going to shoot for a bunch of takedowns, which automatically makes him a little bit better of a DraftKings play and Culibao a little bit better of a FanDuel play. But if he lands a bunch of takedowns, this guy's been a finishing machine on the questionable Chinese WLF circuit. Super suspect for sure. But we've seen a few good fighters come out of there. So I don't know. I think he's either going to get an early finish or get a bunch of takedowns or get knocked out. And whichever one of those happens, this fight's going to produce a high score.
All great DFS outcomes. So you'll be happy to know if you're listening to this, Jake's now fluent in Mandarin after watching all that tape. I mean, I literally charted the entire fight only to realize at the end that he wasn't even in the fight. That's how tough finding some of this tape is on some of these guys in that Chinese league. So let's see. It is 2:26. We'll be here for about 5 more minutes. If you guys have any final questions, let's get them in. Jake, we have a question from Eagles. What's up, Eagles? Thanks for joining in. Thoughts on Bill Algeo? I mean, Jake, I always like targeting him in his last couple of fights when he's been an underdog or in that middle price range. Now he's a favorite. What are your thoughts on him in this matchup?
So Ramos has been finished in the first round in all 3 of his career losses. That's obviously promising right there. I think Algeo is a decent play. I think he has a high floor because, I mean, just look at he basically scored 85 points and 55 points in his first 2 fights. One of those was a decision win. One was a decision loss. So if he had won both of them, consistently 85 points in decisions. High volume. He lands the most strikes on the slate, which is great. He doesn't land a ton of takedowns, but he is a black belt on the ground. Ramos has been submitted and knocked out before. I don't know. I think it's a tough one. Algeo's last 4 finishes have all come in the second round. I mean, maybe that's anecdotal, but it's also a pattern that we have to at least pay some attention to, whereas all of Ramos's losses have come in the first round. So, I mean, that at least creates some potential for a finish in the first 2 rounds. And if we get that, then I think Algeo is definitely going to be a good play. I just don't know if it's going to happen. I think we have 2 exciting fighters here. Ramos likes to throw a bunch of crazy strikes, this behind the leg, sweep thing. I don't know what the hell that is. It looks stupid. The broadcasters always make fun of him. But he also throws really good spinning kicks that are pretty dangerous. But I think I think it's going to be a good scrap. I think we're going to see decent volume, but Algio definitely needs a finish to pay off. If he gets 85 points again in a decision at his price, that's obviously not going to be enough. So he needs a finish. He's got an 18% chance to get a finish if you look at the odds, just 8% to come in the first round. But I kind of like his chances to get a round 2 finish, and I think that would score enough to be useful in DFS.
Yeah, probably a better fight to watch than to have in DFS. But yeah, certainly possibilities where it does go
Right.
off. Yeah. All right, guys, a couple more minutes. Jake, let's talk about your bets. Last week, another ridiculous week. It was like plus 40 units. I mean, just absolutely slaying UFC props. And you do a great job. For those who haven't read the Daily Plug, which is where Jake writes his top plays for DFS, his lineup strategies, FanDuel and DraftKings, and his best bets all in one spot at OccupyFantasy.com. Jake, you do I mean, I love this approach where we're in a high variance sport, and you called it in Discord today, just spraying and praying, playing a bunch of these long shot odds that you don't think should be that long, and just hoping to hit a couple, and you come out on top. Last week, obviously, you hit a few. That's what resulted in the massive week. Love your strategy there. Let's try to nail a stream parlay, which we've somehow failed to do through 4 months of this show, every single week. So, Jake, give me your side of the stream parlay for this week.
All right, I'm gonna keep shooting the long shots. I'm gonna go Hermanson round 1 submission win at plus 1200.
All right, and I'm gonna piggyback this Vandera pick and go with Vandera inside the distance. I think it's what plus 270 or so.
Dude, that's so sick. That was my second option.
All right, well, all right, good. So basically, I got Jake's parlay of the week. um, I verified one side. So Vandera inside the distance, Hermanson round 1 win, round 1 sub or round 1 win.
Round 1 sub. The round 1 win line was way worse. All the value is in the sub line.
Got you. All right, so Hermanson round 1 sub, Vandera inside the distance. If you want more of these types of bets, go to the Daily Plug, OccupyFantasy.com. All right, Jake, a couple more minutes here. Just rapid fire questions. Silva versus Mcgee. I noticed that fight has pretty low ownership overall. What are your thoughts there?
I think that fight goes to a low volume decision. Mcgee has shown that he has absolutely no ceiling. He only has 3 wins in his last 10 fights. I think the last one came in 2018. 14 of his last 15 fights have ended in decisions. Terrible DFS play on that side. Silva, I really liked coming into his last fight against James Krause. He had been on this 14 fight winning streak, tons of finishes, 3 submission finishes in his last 3. He looked super old in his last fight, like really old. Like he went off a cliff between his last 2 fights, like a Tony Ferguson style cliff. I mean, it was bad. So I don't like him here, man. Mcgee's only been finished once, in his last 10 years or something. I definitely am not on either guy, but if I had to play one, it would be Silva and hoping for a round 1 submission.
I guess I'm playing a ton of Mcgee then, is what it sounds like. So, all right, let's recap the entire slate here in the final minute. We talked about how Dvorak is in a spot where he's facing a replacement fighter who is absolutely terrible, completely mispriced because of the pricing dynamic in the late replacement. He's a fantastic play, going to be the highest owned fighter on both sites, but high finishing potential, really good option in all contest types. We talked about how this slate is more of a tape slate. If you watch the fights, if you read the sheet at MMADFS.com, if you read Jake's write-ups there or in the Daily Plug, I think the MMA quote-unquote specialists are going to have a much better time on this event than the DFS pros or DFS players. So keep that in mind, and keep that in mind when you're looking at the model, which is mostly metric-based. And finally, we talked about how this main slate isn't really stackable and low risk. And the final question in the chat is it okay to fade the main event in big GPPs? Jake, I think so. I think we have way less than we normally do. And if you're playing one lineup, I could certainly see not playing because there are plenty of ways that it fails.
Absolutely. I'm cutting my ownership way back on it. I would say I'm probably keeping, Font close, not as high as a normal, as the normal favorite in a main event, but super, super low on Garbrandt, decent amount of Font. But overall, I'm fading like half my lineups. So I think that's the move.
There you go. That'll do it for today's show. If you like what you saw, make sure you click the subscribe button here on YouTube. Get notified whenever we go live or upload any new content. Give us a thumbs up. Shows your support. Lets us know that we should continue to make these types of videos. If you like the UFC videos, give us a thumbs up. That'll let us know. Any further questions, you can always hop in our Discord channel. Click the join button right below the video. OccupyFantasy.com/Discord, where you can chat with Occupy staff like me and Jake, or with other OccupyFantasy.com members. OccupyFantasy.com is where you can read the daily plug and where you can access the Occupy model. And MMADFS.com, run by Jake, is where you can get the sheet, fighter breakdowns, every fight analyzed, both from a betting and DFS perspective. So for Jake, I'm Brian. We appreciate everyone listening. Good luck today, and we'll talk to you soon.